The next forecast for 2024 is that with elections coming, governments will spend more and budget deficits will go up. They could rise further. But investors don't like that, so they're going to push back. In fact, if you look at the budget deficits, America has gone from 3.5 to 6% of GDP is their budget deficit. India from 4 to 5.6, 5.5 approximately. Mexico 2 to 4%, doubled. And Indonesia has remained stable. So budget deficits are going up, elections are coming, they're going to go up even further. So investors are worried about that.
Yeah, so that's my forecast as well,
yes.
that investors will demand a greater premium for holding government debt, just because there's so much supply which is going to be coming. And in an election year, what research shows us is that there's a tendency for politicians to spend even more. So I think that that's the big risk that we run this year, that approval ratings in general are low. Now, of course, it's an exception in countries like India and Indonesia, but in most places, approval ratings of leaders are low. They're going to be tempted to spend even more because the easiest thing is to spend other people's money. But the tension they'll face is that the budget deficits are already very high.
And if you looked at, you called it an epic clash between politicians and investors. And if you look at India, the budget deficit, the biggest worry is the deficit of states. Just explain that.
Yeah.
States their budget deficits are a higher percentage of overall budget deficit than ever before.
Yeah, and it's also because the amount of spending which is done by Indian states is very high. So in that way, we have a true federal system that more than 50% of total spending by government in India is done at the state level, which is nearly twice as high as what the global average is. Globally, most of the spending is done by the center, but in India's case, most of the spending is done by the states. And what's going on in the states as well is that a lot of the spending is going towards freebies and other populist giveaways. And we saw this in the recent elections too. Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, a lot of populist giveaways promised by the government.
I would like to, as a side aspect, calling them freebies, giveaways, etc., there's also welfare measures involved.
Yeah.
So one should be very clear that it does, when it's targeted right, it does help the poor.
Yeah, so it's just about the proportion, which is that like any country needs welfare spending and needs welfare state, right? So that's like a given. Question is, how much can you afford and how much are you spending towards infrastructure and capex and how much are you spending towards welfare?
Would it be fair to say that since there are only a couple of state elections, maybe the state budget deficits won't go up so much, or they'll do it anyway to win more votes in the general election?
Exactly. So the pressure, I'm saying in general, because of the general election, is that the pressure is going to be to spend much more in a year like this. So this is a general comment. It's not just about India, across the world. In fact,
the states here is the difference.
The difference here is the states, but the biggest risk for me is the United States, that they used to run a budget deficit of 3% and now it's going to be 6% for the foreseeable future. It's not as if it's going to be 6% for a year or two. It's going to be 6% budget deficit the US is going to project it to run for the foreseeable future.
Unprecedented and worrying.
Exactly.
Right.
So in fact,